Now, if you're getting a sense of deja vu, you're not alone. We have been through a round of 3 by-elections already, and now we're talking about another one. You'll probably remember the SNP MP Margaret Ferrier, who attended Parliament during lockdown, realised she had COVID and then hopped on a train from London to Scotland while testing positive anyway. This was at the height of lockdown, when the rules were that anyone testing positive should self-isolate for at least 14 days. Remember those times. So when the story first broke back in 2020, she was suspended as an MP, so she's been representing her seat as an independent, and now she's been recalled. So that's when there's a petition calling for her removal from office that has been signed by more than 10% of her constituents. That triggers a by-election. And to me, this is probably the most interesting one of all of the by-elections that we've had this year, because it's Humza Yousaf's first electoral test, really. Yeah. And it's also a test for Labour. You know, this is Central Belt territory, you know, which it could once count on for its support. It's an SNP Labour marginal. It's a Glasgow suburb, so it's, you know, Anna Sarwar's patch, and, you know, Labour should be winning it off the SNP, given the state that the SNP is in. Can you tell us a bit more about the seat, Ben? You've written a really good piece on State of the Nation, your polling site, which all of our listeners should go and check out, but give us a summary.
Your summary was pretty much bang on. It is out of Glasgow, it is suburbs, it's south of the river, and it is one of those, I suppose, neck and neck seats, because it voted 50-50 yes, no in the independence referendum. So Rutherglen and Hamilton West, outskirts of Glasgow, it should be won by Labour. And historically, it's been Labour for as long as can be. In 2010, it went Labour by 45 points. In 2015, it swung to the SNP as a lot of yes voters abandoned Labour. And it went to the SNP in 2015 by 17 points for a majority of 10,000. And then in 2017, when Jeremy Corbyn has a surge across England and to a lesser extent in Scotland, it went Labour by a margin of just 300 votes. And then the SNP took it back quite easily with a majority of 5,000. Now, Britain Predicts, which does have some form for getting elections right. We did get Uxbridge and South Ruislip wrong. We did understate the Labour lead in Selby and Ainsty. But again, just bear in mind, models are models. They tell you what public opinion suggests you. They're based on opinion polls. And sometimes if you're overperforming, you're overperforming. But what the forecast in Rutherglen is Labour 48%, SNP 37%, a lead there of 11 percentage points, which is a reversal of the 2019 result when it was 44% SNP, 35% Labour. You do see a bit of a squeeze of the Tory vote in Scotland there. And it's worth just bearing in mind the transfers in Scotland between voting Labour and voting Conservative is a lot greater than in England. Basically, unionism is a big part of how people vote. And so a lot of Labour voters in 2016, when Ruth Davidson was doing really well, were more than happy to go to the Conservatives. And what we're seeing now is a huge reversal of that in the polls. But you're also seeing a great many of SNP supporters both indicating they want to stay at home. They are quite apathetic with the way the SNP's gone. They're quite apathetic with the way Nicola Sturgeon has brought the SNP crashing down. But a lot of them are also quite willing to go to Anna Sarwar's Labour Party. Sarwar has done rather well in not necessarily rebranding the Labour Party, but giving it a bit of oomph and identity among Scottish voters. And we are seeing the dividends of that now.
Yeah, it is interesting when you look at what the leaders are doing in terms of campaigning in the seat. I think Humza Yousaf has been there a lot in the past 2 weeks and tried to make it his campaign. As you said, Anish, it's really important for him to demonstrate that his leadership isn't a complete failure and he has had some success before the general election next year. And then for the Labour Party especially, I mean, we've got to remember when the by-election is likely to happen. I think the earliest date and what Labour are gunning for is October 5th. It's up to the SNP to move that motion forwards in the House of Commons, but Labour will be pushing for it, and we expect it to come around October 5th, just before party conferences. It's going to set the tone. There's going to be a lot of fallout from the result, trying to understand whether Labour can reclaim the seats they lost back in 2015 in Scotland, which would be key to their majority. So it's really important. It's really important for both of them, both leaders, and how people will perceive them to perform next year.
Yeah, and we know that Labour already has some very good campaigning heft around this seat because of the outcome of the recall petition. Yeah. So 12,000 constituents signed the petition, wanted the seat to go to a by-election, and that, you know, you'd assume that quite a few of those people are people who would like to see the seat back in Labour hands. or disillusioned SNP voters who were not happy with the way that their MP acted. And so you can already see, actually, perhaps this is a precursor to Labour having quite a lot of sway in this area. I mean, they've been kicking around there for a while as well.
Yeah, completely. And I was speaking to someone last night who's been campaigning in the constituency recently. They say the office is all set up, they're raring to go. They've been planning this for a very long time. I think the key issues they said they're going to focus on buses. They're going to focus on Margaret Ferrier and how the perception that she stuck around and she's basically not representing her constituents correctly, but she wanted to wait for the recall petition rather than just resigning. They're going to be pointing to the SNP's record in government. I mean, the way they describe it, as Labour often do, is that you've got this tired sense of decline around the SNP in the same way that they describe the Conservatives in England. So they're the key points that Labour are going to go for. And I think there is a sense of a momentum, as there is with the party in general. You're going to see that pop up in different places, and people want to do well and now expect to do well, and that also carries risks.
Yeah, and it does carry risk, because part of the narrative of Labour's revival has been that, as luck would have it, circumstances in Scotland have changed. And actually, this is the first time in a long time that we've seen Scottish Labour on the up. I went to go and interview Anna Sarwar back in May, and it was really interesting because they were waiting for this Redfield and Wilton poll, which is the polling company that polls Scotland regularly on the different parties' favourability. And that day, Labour had held a favourability rating of 12%, not very high, but they were delighted because the SNP had dropped to -4%. And so it's about whether or not they can build on that momentum by sealing it with a real electoral victory. But if they can't, and it happens before conference season, that could change the entire political narrative. Look what happened when they lost Uxbridge and South Ruislip. We've been talking about it for weeks.
Quite. And it does make a massive difference. I think there was a similar by-election. Was it a by-election? I think it was in 1964, just before Harold Wilson got back in with a very slim majority in the same constituency or around that area. And it does make a difference in a few ways. It makes a difference in terms of how the media cover you, how you manage your party, whether you're going to have a united, unified, purpose-led, intentional shadow cabinet who believe in your leadership. Or have you got people speculating that you haven't got it in you, that you might have more momentum within the opposition party? So it does make a massive difference.
Yeah, so there was a by-election in Rutherglen in 1964, which back then, Glasgow Rutherglen it was called. It was a Labour gain from the Conservatives back in the day when the Conservatives won around 50-something% of the voting seats like these. And it was a Labour gain with a pretty hefty swing. So yeah, you're completely right. They do shape narratives. And I don't wish to talk about our Westminster-centric media, but sometimes we have got into that. I think we've got into the habit of writing off Scotland as SNP territory for far too long, and it's changing. Britain predicts across the whole of Scotland does record right now, if an election was held today, a quite sizable drop in the number of seats for the SNP. So they won, 48, 49 at the last election out of a total of 58, 59. Right now, we've got them on course to win 30, which is a drop of 18. And then you've got Labour up from a solitary 1 in Edinburgh South to 21. And the Tories down 3 to 3. And the Lib Dems up 1 on 5. So we are seeing quite a big change. A lot of this is razor-thin margins, so don't count on those numbers just yet. We are a far cry from where we were in 2010 when Gordon Brown was Labour leader. Back then, Labour was getting 41 seats out of a total of 59. They were coming away with the vote share, and the SNP were very much in the doldrums with just 1 in 5 voters. We're never going to go back to that. But what it seems we are shifting towards, I don't know how long will it last when Labour's in government, but we are shifting to a more competitive Labour Party, and absolutely Labour should be over the moon about the fact they're in a net positive of favourability in Scotland, because they haven't been in that for God knows how long. It's just worth bearing in mind, not one leader of the Labour Party in Scotland until Anna Sarwar this decade and the past decade as well has had net favourability with voters. Kezia Dugdale didn't, Ian Gray didn't, Richard Leonard definitely didn't. Not one of them was that well liked with the public. Anna Sarwar, though, is, relatively speaking, of course, he dips and ebbs and flows, but it is quite impressive. He's not Ruth Davidson, because Ruth Davidson had a really, really good level of favourability at one point, but he's demonstrating competence for the public, and the public are noticing.
Yeah, that's really interesting because when I met him, he was concerned about the fact that the majority of the Scottish public back then said they didn't know how he was doing as Labour leader, which suggested that they didn't really know who he was. There wasn't that recognition there. And so on purpose, he's been going out and about around Scotland, meeting voters, doing sort of quite cheesy photo shoots, eating deep fried Mars bars, getting the press along, getting Keir Starmer along, going to places particularly like Rutherglen to try and introduce himself to the public. So it sounds like that's been cutting through a bit, that strategy. Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know what you think. Please make sure you leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this podcast, you can watch more of our videos on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe.